My name is Donna DiCarlantonio, and I'm the treasurer and event coordinator of USC Law School's Student Animal Legal Defense Fund. As a new SALDF chapter, we are incredibly excited to be co-hosting such an important event that traverses many different fields of law, including animal, health, and environmental law. We are also very excited to have the Dean of USC Law School, Robert Rasmussen, give opening remarks. Dean Rasmussen joined USC Law School in 2007 as Dean and Carl Mason Franklin Chair in Law. With expertise focused on market forces and corporate reorganization practice, Dean Rasmussen has authored and co-authored dozens of articles published in leading law journals and has played a significant role in shaping jurisprudence in his field. USC Law School has significantly benefited from his deanship. Without further ado, Dean Rasmussen.
Thank you, Donna. I'm really excited about being able to co-sponsor this event and have it here in the law school for a couple of reasons. The first is I really think the Animal Defense Legal Fund really should. Okay, Animal Legal Defense Fund. You almost got it right there, but it really shows, I think, the power of law and the power of attorneys. That in less than 30 years, this organization has taken an important idea and used the legal system to make meaningful and impactful change in our society. And as the dean of a law school, that's what we aspire for all our students, to find that passion, that drive, to go out and use your training to make a difference, to find a way to make the world better. And it's great to partner with an organization such as this who does that every day and lives those values. And the second reason I'm really excited about this is because one thing I'm very proud of at USC is our students. We give our students obviously a great education, but more importantly, we encourage them to take leadership. People like Donna who help organize these sorts of things. It's that sort of student leadership, that sort of involvement, that sort of engagement that really assures me that our students are going to go out and make a difference in the world, because really that's what we're about, both as a law school and more importantly as lawyers. So again, we are very honored to be able to host the first symposium in Los Angeles, and I hope it's the first of many. So with that, back to Donna.
Thank you, Dean Rasmussen. Stephen Wells is the executive director of the Animal Legal Defense Fund. 15 years ago, Steve founded ALDF's Animal Law Program, which provides support and resources to law professional and student members to assist ALDF with its mission to protect the lives and advance the interests of animals through the legal system. Under his leadership, ALDF exponentially expanded student chapters from 12 to more than 200, along with strengthening its pro bono network, which yielded nearly $2 million last year alone in donated legal hours. Steve also created an in-house litigation program that has allowed ALDF to triple its caseload. As the preeminent legal advocate for animals, ALDF has filed some of the most creative, cutting-edge lawsuits to protect animals. And without further ado, Mr. Steve Wells.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this, the first symposium hosted by our Animal Legal short on PR types. I want to thank Dean Rasmussen, first of all, for his support of this event and for allowing us to have it here at USC Gould School of Law and for hosting. And also, I want to give special thanks to the USC Law's Student Animal Legal Defense Fund, and especially to Donna DiCarlantonio. I knew I'd mess that up. DiCarlantonio, right? Okay. For co-hosting this. She's done a lot of work, and we really appreciate it. And a very special thanks to our event sponsors, our platinum sponsor is Match Meats, which is a premium plant-based organic foods company. We also have a silver sponsor who couldn't join us tonight, Tatiana Freitas. And we have bronze sponsors B. Nimlaha and Vegan Green Planet. Thank you so much. And we also have a special sponsor that provided some in-kind sponsorship. Beyond Meat has provided food for the event and also some coupons for you all. So thanks to you all for helping us make this happen. The Legal Defense Fund has been working to protect the lives and advance the interests of animals through the legal system for more than 35 years. And that's what makes ALDF unique, is our exclusive focus on the law. And we do that because really the fundamental problem for animals is that our laws still consider them things, property, more like this lectern, when we know that they're sentient and living beings. So that's one of the fundamental things we need to change in the law, and it's why we focus exclusively on the law. And that's why every day for those 35 years we've been fighting in every area of the law to advance the laws protecting animals. We file lawsuits to stop animal cruelty. We assist and train prosecutors and law enforcement in the handling of animal cruelty cases. And we work with legislators to write and pass better animal protection laws. We also have a network, as I mentioned, of 200 student ALDF chapters in law schools across the country, including the one here at USC, and every law school in the LA area now has a chapter. And we work with our chapters to make sure that anyone going through law school now, so future lawyers, judges, politicians, and prosecutors, are made aware of the need for fundamental change and how weak our animal protection laws are at this stage. We've also developed a network of 450 law firms and more than 2,000 individual attorneys across the country who have volunteered to do pro bono work for ALDF. And we really could not do the work we do without those pro bono volunteers. So I hope all you law students here will go on in your careers and become law professional members and then help us with our work. And our newest program is aimed at investigating and gathering evidence of the cruelty that routinely happens, especially in commercial operations across the country, in places like factory farms and puppy mills. And we brought on board to direct the program a veteran undercover investigator, TJ Tumasse, who's right over here. And TJ, as I say, is a veteran investigator who frankly has seen things that I am happy firsthand, in person, unspeakable cruelty that I can barely witness in a film much later, let alone have been present. So he knows the business and he's gonna lead us. And the goal is to continue to gather evidence, to continue to expose what happens in these animal horror shows, but also to provide, which ALDF can do like no other group, a legal backdrop so that we gather the evidence and we have a legal strategy to push for laws based on what we find. So I'm very excited about that. And over the years, Los Angeles has played an important role in all of this work. Angelenos have a particularly strong commitment to animal protection, as evidenced by passing laws like the ban on retail sale of pets. And most recently, I think LA can take a lot of credit for the ban on bullhooks, which are used to control large animals like elephants. And I really think that ban had a huge impact on Ringling deciding to end its elephant acts once and for all 3 years from now. So thank you to Los Angeles. ALDF is also, we've been involved in LA issues for a long time, but we've always seen that there's great opportunity here. Right now, ALDF is involved in a lawsuit against a pet store chain called Barkworks, which has been lying to customers and selling puppies from puppy mills for years. And we're looking to LA to be a place where we can expand that work and really create a model that can work as a representative for the rest of the world, really, on what's possible when people get together and change the law. So the Animal Legal Defense Fund is expanding our presence here, and I'm really happy to announce that just last week we opened an office in Hollywood, and we will have a permanent presence here. And more importantly, I've hired a very accomplished attorney and animal advocate to run our program here, and she will be in charge of all the work that we do in LA and throughout Southern California. And her name is Lindsay Larris. She's standing here. And Lindsay was a litigator in private practice, which is where we found her, but she also dedicated a significant amount of her time to animal issues, and was, even while she was running her practice and litigating, she was our pro bono counsel in the Barkworks case I mentioned, and has done many other things for us. I'm very excited that she'll be leading the charge here. So I'd like to introduce Lindsay and let her tell you a little bit more about our plans for this weekend and also for LA. So thank you. Please help me welcome her.
Thank you, Steve. On behalf of ALDF and the newly formed ALDF Los Angeles office, I just want to echo Steve and Donna and the dean's statements, and thank you all for coming out today. And I know it's Saturday morning early, and this is great to see such a good turnout. Happy to report that the symposium is actually officially sold out as of a few days ago. Yeah. So that certainly made my first few weeks here a bit easier, knowing that there's so much support in the LA area for animal issues. So like many of you in this room, my first experience with ALDF began in law school when I met some like-minded students at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, and we helped start the first SALDF chapter there, followed by an animal law journal and an animal law course. So anything is possible if you're a law student, and that was super easy and accepting at the school to start. As Steve mentioned, I've been in private practice, and I'm so proud and so happy to now be working towards my passion full-time, doing animal legal defense funds work in Los Angeles. Though I'm originally from New Jersey, I've called LA my home for the past 7 years, and I've met so many people here who are passionate about their concern for animal welfare issues. I'm proud and honored to be the first director here, and I look forward to bringing ALDF's resources to LA, and also to bring all the talent from LA to help in ALDF's resource mission across the country. We plan to host many more events like this. We're going to provide support for local animal protection legislation in the area, and also to support local prosecutors to help put an end to animal cruelty issues and help put those animal abusers in jail. With this LA regional network as a model, ALDF plans to push the law forward for animals in other regions as well across the country. Over the past few months, I've met a number of you in this room, and I'm excited to continue to meet people and make connections in LA. LA, as you all know, boasts so many talented attorneys, law students, nonprofit organizations, and other animal welfare supporters that the possibilities for ALDF's work here are just endless. And we've done so much so far, and I just know we can do a lot more here. As far as our future events going on, we have this program tonight. We also have a benefit night coming up at Veggie Grill in West Hollywood in April. And I'm encouraging you all to sign up to join the LA Regional Network's email listserv, which will be separate about what's going on in the area. And if you notice at the tables up front, there's a table with a white tablecloth, and you can find that sign-up sheet up there. And I also encourage you to contact me personally about local issues, as I'm going to be relying on the community here to know about what's going on in Los Angeles. Today at ALDF's first Animal Law Symposium, we're focusing on how these concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs or factory farms, impact humans, health, animals, and the environment. So we're going to have 3 panels of amazing speakers today, and also 2 keynote presentations. So I'm really looking forward to this being a great day. As you might have noticed, we do not have a formal agenda printed out, trying to save paper, but we do have an app available. It's the event app at eventmobi.com/Animal Law Symposium 2015. And on that, you can find out about the agenda today and also about the speakers and other resources. I'm going to introduce the first panel right now, which is some of my colleagues at ALDF. I would like to introduce ALDF's Director of the Animal Law Program, Pam Hart, along with Carterillard, Director of Litigation, Chris Green, the Director of Legislative Affairs, and TJ Tumasse, the Manager of the Investigations Program. So the first panel, please come on up. Thank you, everybody.
I'm going to sneak in here unbidden because I forgot to say something. For those of you on Twitter, we would love it if you want to take pictures and tweet about the event, and we're using the hashtag ALDF. So just hashtag ALDF if you're tweeting. Thanks.
We're loading the program right now, so if anyone needs a refill on your coffee, now's the time. There goes Carter. Go get him.
Running for the exits. Thank you. Good night.
He's gone. I'm able to see everybody.
No more coffee, come back.
Because I've got a presentation to click through, so I'll be
All those people outside eating.
Yeah.
Get on in here. Quit eating.
The food will be there afterwards.
I can either confirm or deny. Proceed.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Pam Hart, and I am the director of the Animal Law Program at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. It's great to have everyone here early on a Saturday morning. Welcome to the first panel. Our first panel is going to focus on CAFOs from an animal protection perspective. Also joining me this morning, as you already know, and I'll give them proper introductions before they speak, are Chris Green, TJ Tumasse, and Carterillard, who's getting more coffee right now. So when most people think about animals, they likely think about cats, dogs, maybe even wildlife. If they ever stop to consider farmed animals, they may imagine cows grazing in a field. In the next few minutes, I will give you a reality check. Most animals in the U.S. are farmed animals who live in a state of constant suffering. Each year, American agribusiness raises and kills 10 billion farmed animals. Most of these spend their lives in massive industrial factories that are called concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, a system that was developed in the 1950s to maximize output of meat, dairy, and eggs while minimizing human labor and other costs. So why do these animals suffer in this environment? Animals suffer due to intensive confinement, overcrowding. They can't act as they naturally would. They can't move freely about. There's mutilations, debeaking, dehorning, castration, tail docking, and toe clipping. Breeding practices by industries also cause the animals to suffer, intending to maximize their output. Approximately 6 million female pigs, called sows, spend their entire lives in intensive confinement. Most of these sows live in enclosures called crates that are 7 feet long by 2 feet wide, only slightly larger than the sow. It's impossible for the sow to turn around or even to walk. Their lives are an endless cycle of pregnancy and nursing, as if they were nothing more than machines. Pigs can live to be 10 to 15 years, but only after 2 to 2.5 years, these sows are sent to slaughter. Approximately 60 million pigs, the offspring of these sows, are raised to be eaten in the U.S. each year. They live in crowded pens inside a massive building. These intelligent animals have nothing to occupy their time or no bedding to lay on. The air pollution inside these buildings causes the pigs to get sick and can be deadly to the pigs and the human workers inside if the fans stop working. These are chickens that are raised to be eaten. The meat industry calls them broilers. There may be 20,000 to 30,000 broilers in a building. They are crowded together, cannot perform their natural behavior, and are forced to live in their own urine and feces. These birds are selectively bred to grow extremely fast. They reach market weight at only 7 weeks old. In the past 50 years, the rate of which they grow has increased by 300%. Their skeletons have trouble supporting this incredibly fast growth, so they experience trouble walking and other deformities. This rapid growth sometimes causes acute failure, as their hearts and lungs cannot effectively circulate oxygen through their bodies. 95% of egg-laying hens spend their whole lives in battery cages, much like this. Battery cages are wire cages. They're stacked row upon row with 5 to 10 chickens per cage. The hens are crowded and they live with no privacy, no places to perch, and can't exhibit their normal behaviors. Many of them lose their feathers and their bodies are covered in bruises and sores. Just a century ago, hens produced 100 eggs per year. CAFO hens have been selectively bred to produce more than 250 eggs per year. This is really hard on their bodies. Their natural lifespan is 5 to 8 years, but after 1 to 2 years, these hens produce fewer eggs, so they are sent to slaughter to become frozen dinners or fertilizer. Male chicks cannot lay eggs, so they are killed as soon as they hatch. The killing methods are inhumane. They are sucked through pipes onto electrified kill plates, gassed, or ground up alive, fully conscious. The treatment of turkeys raised for meat is similar to the treatment of broiler chickens. They are crowded in massive buildings that house approximately 10,000 turkeys at a time. Turkeys in the wild are normally sleek. CAFO turkeys are bred to grow huge breasts that grow so fast that they have painful leg problems and their hearts just can't keep up, oftentimes resulting in heart attacks. Cattle raised to be eaten are sent to giant feedlots to be fattened for the last few months before they are sent to slaughter. A feedlot may hold as many as 100,000 cattle at a time. Like sows, dairy cows are treated as machines. In order to produce milk, cows, like all other mammals, must go through pregnancy. Thus, dairy cows spend their entire lives being pregnant, giving birth, and producing milk. Their calves are taken from them when they are 1 to 3 days old after they are born, which is distressing to both the mom and the calf. Today's CAFO cows have been selectively bred to produce twice as much milk as they did 40 years ago. This massive increase in milk production takes a toll on their bodies. While a cow could live to be 15 to 20 years, after 3 or 4 years of producing huge volumes of milk, most dairy cows are sent to slaughter and made into hamburger. Male calves, like male chicks, are not needed by the dairy industry since they cannot produce milk. They are either sent to slaughter within a few days after they are born, or these normally playful and active babies are kept in intensive confinement crates for 16 weeks and then sold to slaughter to be sold as veal. This is a massive industry, and most farmed animals are still in a constant state of suffering. Now I would like to formally introduce you to our panelists who will give you a sense of what is being done to protect the lives and advance the interests of animals through the legal system. Our first speaker today is Chris Green. He is director of our Legislative Affairs program. This program helps to pass tougher animal protection laws in state and federal legislators, as well as county boards and municipal councils. Equally important, the program works to block bills proposed by those who seek to exploit or endanger animals. Chris graduated from Harvard Law School and the University of Illinois. In 2004, he published a groundbreaking article titled "The Future of Veterinary Malpractice Liability in the Care of Companion Animals" in the Animal Law Review. The article was the first to calculate the economics of vet malpractice insurance, strongly supporting the argument of awarding damages beyond a companion animal's replacement cost. Chris is a founding vice chair of the American Bar Association's Animal Law Committee. He has also served on the National Center for Animal Law and acted as an advisor to the National Canine Research Council and is a member of the American Vet Medical Law Association and Illinois Farm Bureau. With that, I give you Mr. Chris Green.
While they're getting that ready, I want to thank Liberty and Joyce for putting together such a great program. And it's sorry Joyce couldn't be here, so I could give her an extra special thanks in person for having this be the second conference in a row where she's got me speaking first on the very first panel of the day. I think her hope is that that will cause me, I'll still be groggy, and that will cause me to speak more slowly, so I'll be more intelligible, but don't hold your hopes up. It's probably not going to happen. I have a lot of information to get through, so I tend to speak a little briskly. So my info will be up at the end, and I'll be here all day. If you have questions, just, yeah, you can hit me up then. But yeah, it's great to be here. These days, given recent history, it's actually great to be anywhere for me. But so I'm going to talk about ag-gag laws. As I spoke a bit about before, my department does two different things. We do, proactive, trying to get positive laws passed that help animals further, such as the bullhook bans that Sherry Shankar has been so involved in. But we also do a lot of defense, where the folks who want to exploit animals further try to pass their own laws to allow them to do that, and it runs the gamut. So that's specifically what I'm going to speak about today, are the ag-gag laws. Formatting, yikes, okay. So hopefully this will work. Formatting's a little off here, but what I'm going to show you first is a very short video, just so you understand what we're talking about. These laws, called ag-gag, they're attempts by the factory and farming industry to prevent undercover investigators from going in and documenting the conditions that are there. And there's two categories of those conditions. There's the outright law breaking, which is what you're going to see here, where the farm workers are actually usually being directed to break the laws as far as animal welfare concerns and human health and safety. But then there's also the second category of stuff that's actually legal to do. They just don't want you to see, because then you're going to care about it and make it illegal. This was taken at a farm in Wisconsin from a major supplier to DiGiorno Pizza, called Reese Brothers Farm. The computer's a little slow. They're usually doing that because these cows are too sick to walk of their own accord, so that's why they were dragging them and lifting around, and in some states it's illegal to put cows that are too sick to walk into the food supply. But each time they do that, they lose money, so that's why they do this. And again, this is just one investigation at one farm in Wisconsin in December of the year before last. Almost looks like some sort of alien abduction thing, or just these like so unnatural to have a cow in those circumstances. All right, I think we can probably move on. So that was an undercover investigation by Mercy for Animals, as I mentioned, in Wisconsin. And the good news that came out of that was that not only did that supplier get dropped, but it spurred the public pressure, and the outcry spurred Nestle to introduce sweeping changes in the way they source their food, and that went far beyond simple things like this. So Nestle's one of the largest food suppliers in the country. So this actually led to really positive measures. So sorry about the formatting here, but so why is this important? The main reason, as you see, yes, that's terrible, but those videos have an effect. There's recent surveys shown that people who are, there's a very rapidly increasing numbers of people who are going vegetarian, going vegan, and I think 46% of those polled said one of the reasons that they made that change was from quote unquote watching videos online. And full disclosure, my great uncle Charlie, I currently manage a farm that's been in my family for 178 years. And my great uncle Charlie was a dairy professor at Kansas State. But even Kansas State's ag department here say, as a whole, media attention to animal welfare has significant negative effects on U.S. meat demand. And we've actually seen that happening. In the past 5 or 6 years, there's been a drop in the amount of the number of animals slaughtered for food in this country, from hitting a peak of about 9.5 billion in 2008 now to about 9.1, which is still an astronomical number. But to think, with the population continuing to grow, to actually drop down, that's 500 million fewer animals that were killed this last year. And so where did this come from? So the origins of these, what are called ag laws, were passed back in the early 90s. And these were sort of following in the footsteps of sort of the lab trashing, hysteria. And they were worried that people were going to come in and damage research facilities and factory farms. So they had these names, as you can see, the Animal Research Facility Damage Act and Farm Animal Research Protection Act. And these were mainly sort of like laws to prevent people coming in, breaking and entering things that are already illegal, but they're just making them like really illegal. And so doing damage in this but it included taking photographs and making recordings, which as folks became more involved in doing undercover surveillance, realized that could prohibit that. So the first three states were, bless you, Kansas, Montana, North Dakota, and as you can see, each one of these makes it a crime to take pictures or use sort of recording devices. But that was sort of it. Topped out, Tennessee passed one a little bit later, and then that's sort of where it ended up. It was this kind of craze, people passed these laws and then sort of forgot about it. But the idea was sort of resurrected earlier, the previous decade, by the American Legislative Exchange Council. How many people here are familiar with ALEC? Good and bad. So ALEC is sort of like this corporate bill mill, a very conservative organization that creates model legislation. They were the ones behind the Stand Your Ground laws that killing Trayvon Martin. They're the ones behind a lot of the invasive anti-choice measures where women have to undergo this invasive ultrasound procedure. And they're the ones who drafted the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. How many people are familiar with that? Well, that's generally, that was for those who aren't aware, it was a law that basically equated animal rights with terrorism, and had a whole host of provisions, including sort of causing economic damage, which may or may not include simple things like boycotts. So in the original version of the AETA, they had a provision that created a felony for entering an animal research facility, with recording devices with the intent to commit criminal activities or defame the facility or its owner. So it's weird because entering with the intent to commit criminal activities, criminal activities are already illegal, and defamation. It's hard for me to understand how filming something can actually be defamation, because defense of defamation is the truth and it's filmed, so it's obviously it happened. But even with those, this provision was considered too extreme even for the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, so it was cut out. But then after some time passed, 10 years go by, and Alec's like, we've got this great provision. We've got all of our friends in agriculture angry about these embarrassing investigations. So they took this provision, dusted it off, claimed that an Iowa senator drafted it around her kitchen table, and started reintroducing them at the state level. And so with these kind of go a step further than the previous ones you saw. There's three main elements. One is to just outright criminalize the recording of what's going on, even by long-term employees, which is sort of anti-whistleblower. The other is criminalize obtaining a job under false pretenses or with the intent to disrupt operations. Some of this language is so vague that it could be really broadly applied. And that provision exists already in the Iowa, Missouri, and Idaho laws. And the third is to require, and this is the latest flavor, if you will, these what's called quick reporting provisions, where anyone who witnesses or records abuse is required to report that within a certain time frame. In Missouri, you have to report it within 12 hours, and you have to turn over all of your evidence. So where we stand with these sort of AG-GAG 2.0 bills, since 2010, there's been 36 of them introduced across 23 states. And 4 of those have been enacted into law. But the good news is the rest all failed. I think universally, the animal protection movement sees this as a negative, and we've been very involved with coalition building, with workers' rights organizations, with journalism, and with like civil liberties organizations who just see this as an outright restriction on free speech. So there's 7 states currently that have them, and trends are going in our favor. So just in the last 3 sessions, legislative sessions, there's been 25 of these bills introduced across 17 states, and pretty much every single one except for Idaho has been defeated. And in Idaho, we filed suit against that within 3 weeks of its passage. And there's a ruling, or there's a hearing coming up on that on April 28th, where it looks pretty favorable that it might go our way. So fingers crossed on that. And so the red states here, you can see, are the ones that currently have AG-GAG provisions. The yellow ones are all ones that have been tried and failed. And there's a few more that happened this year that aren't on there. So what's going on this session? There have been 6 bills introduced so far. Wyoming, I'll explain in a sec, has a bit of an asterisk. And North Carolina just got introduced last week, and we're still probably expecting one in Wisconsin. Pam and I are going to be there on Tuesday at the Capitol, seeing what happened there. Wyoming was, most folks aren't really counting this as an AG-GAG law. It was primarily, specifically, aimed at a group called the Western Watersheds Project, who had, they do great work on revealing the effects, environmental effects of factory farming, and they had crossed over someone's land to take water samples, and so this was specifically aimed at them. And the governor himself even came out and declared that this law in no way is aimed at animal agriculture or undercover investigations, but the language is still vague enough that it could be applied. And we did try to get an amendment added to it to specifically delineate that it did not apply to undercover investigations, and that amendment failed. So it's a bit of a gray area. But the big strategy, and what I want to mainly talk about, is how in the past couple years, Idaho, yes, they passed this terrible, outright unconstitutional law, but some of the other states are a little smarter, and they're trying to couch these efforts in ways that make it seem like they're actual, like, pro-animal, anti-cruelty bills. So we'll look at a couple case studies. And there's the primary group behind this, the public face of these laws, is a group called the Animal Agriculture Alliance. A woman named Kay Johnson Smith and Emily Meredith, who Will Potter has debated on Democracy Now! And some other outlets. And so they're saying that, oh, well, we just want people to report cruelty. All of our producers, they love their animals, and they want to know right away if someone's harming them so they can make it stop. And they even kind of borrow New York's terrorism slogan. It's like, if you see something, say something. It's that simple. Well, the reality is, they like, if you see something, say something, so we can identify you, fire, and make sure you don't see anything else, and record it and show it to other people. The analogy I have is that imagine if you had a DEA agent who spends 6 months infiltrating a drug trafficking network. It would be like requiring them to out themselves and reveal their identity the moment they see a $5 drug buy. So if that keeps happening, all you're going to get are the people on the ground who are kind of doing the bidding of the higher-ups. You're never going to catch the cartel owner who's importing the drugs into the country. And the same thing happens here. The Hallmark case in California, that was an investigation where Humane Society went in, they recorded all this terrible stuff for a week. They go back to the USDA and saying, we've got blatant law breaking. We've got sick and diseased cattle being dragged to slaughter and entering the food supply. I mean, it's an outright violation of law. USDA is like, we don't really see it. So they go back for another week, get another week's footage, go back to USDA, like second time, like, look at all this blatant law breaking going on while USDA inspectors are actually at the facility themselves under their own eyes. USDA is still like, we still don't really see it. We're not going to investigate. Do another week. third time USDA, so they go public with it. It leads to the single largest beef recall in U.S. history, 143 million pounds of beef, 37 million pounds of which was headed for the school lunch program, sick and diseased cattle. So obviously when you have 143 million pounds of beef, because what happens in the other case is like, you know, the poor low-income workers who are caught on camera immediately get fired and scapegoated, and the plant manager's like, oh, we had no idea this was happening, and that's why they want you to report this right away. But like I said, when you're dealing with 143 million pounds of beef, it's obviously not a few bad low-income worker apples. That's obviously that it's policy at that facility. And so in late 2013, New Hampshire added, they introduced HB 110, and it kind of put a new spin on this, and here you can see the language. So it required recordings of cruelty to livestock to be, anyone who records anything has to submit it and turn over all their evidence and report it within 24 hours. This is the first draft of the bill. Again, kind of going up against the line of constitutionality, and so they softened it. They said, okay, you know what, we've seen on these other lawsuits. So towards the end of the session, they came in, and they also realized that, oh, that would apply to them. So any person who records anything, if you're a plant owner, that gives you the duty to report. So they said, anyone who witnesses another person performing has a duty to report, and with 48 hours, and you have to, rather than forcing you to turn over evidence, you just have to let law enforcement know they have the evidence. And then the last one is the most insidious, where this is what applies to the actual plant owners. It should be a defense to prosecution under this section if the person witnessing reasonably believes his or herself to be criminally liable for the conduct of the actor, aka you're the owner of the facility and you see your own people committing cruelty. You're exempted from reporting, which kind of gives a lie to what this is about. And what's even crazier about this is that cruelty to livestock isn't actually illegal in New Hampshire. They've got an exemption in the cruelty code. So the way they had to gerrymander this, they said they have all the list in their cruelty statutes. Anyone who witnesses someone committing any of these things over here that's illegal to do to cat and dogs, you're required to report it. Even though the underlying thing isn't actually a crime, you're still, and they had to kind of just create all this language because it's not illegal. So, but it's illegal to report something, to not report something that's not illegal. I mean, it's just absurd. And we're saying, okay, if this is really about this, like, oh, we're just trying to prevent cruelty. Who wouldn't want cruelty reported right away? Like, okay, then why does it only apply specifically to livestock? Why not all animals? And so there's a great coalition of organizations. We all had to divvy up and call because, surprisingly, New Hampshire has the fourth largest legislative body in the world, behind like India, Britain, and the U.S. Congress. 400 members of their House alone for this tiny state. So we just called them all up one by one, and most had no bill, and we succeeded. The bill was killed. But then this year, Colorado had a bill, and they put a different spin on it. They say, oh, well, this is just going to be a general across-the-board mandatory cruelty reporting, which, in a lot of states we have passed requiring veterinarians and other folks, kind of like with following some of the child abuse laws. And so they have this whole list of individuals who are now required to report suspected cruelty within 48 hours. Veterinarians, which they already have a provision, groomers, trainers, even like psychologists and therapists. And so a lot of local groups like, this is a great thing. Like, we should get behind this. And then they have, I guess it would be 22 enumerated individuals who are required to report. And then it has this last one. And, quote, anyone who has reasonable cause to know or suspect an animal is abandoned, mistreated, or neglected. And that's what the devil's into those details. That includes all undercover investigators. So that was the true intent of this law. It wasn't really about, like I said, there was already a mandatory vet reporting bill or law in Colorado. And so what was troubling is that some of the local animal protection groups on the ground still didn't quite understand this and thought it was a good thing to pass this mandatory reporting. But luckily we were able to educate folks. Justin Marceau, our lead litigator on the Idaho and Utah lawsuits, he and I drafted this op-ed together that he got 5 of his other constitutional, is that to go? Okay, great, thanks. Sorry, and so he was able to get 5 of his other constitutional law professors at the University of Denver to sign on to this, and it was really great. And that's why this term ag-gag is so wonderful, because it really does brand both terms what these are about. It gives you a concise way of describing, naming these things and letting folks know what they actually do. So Arizona last year, and it's unfortunately resurrected this year, here they took yet another step. Rather than just introducing something now that is kind of a wolf in sheep's clothing that's pretending to be animal protection when it's not, here the Arizona cattlemen actually took a bill that was pro-animal and sort of bastardized it. So the year before, in a lot of states, the Farm Bureau and cattlemen and other agricultural organizations, they will kill, because they have a lot of money and power, they will kill animal protection measures even if they have nothing to do with agriculture, even if they specifically exempt ag animals, but they just feel it's the camel's nose under the tent, and they don't want anything that protects animals they think will eventually lead to greater sentiment and ultimately harm what they're doing or impinge what they're doing. And so they had killed this companion animal bill the previous session that added a few pretty minor provisions. It included like a definition of hoarding and required psychological testing for those convicted of animal cruelty, which are good things, but they still killed that. But then they went behind closed doors to Katie Brophy McGee, the sponsor of the bill, and said, hey, we'll let you have your little psychological hoarding, whatever, if you allow us to tack on our kind of top 10 wish list of things we'd like to do to farmed animals. And sadly, she took that deal and negotiated this completely behind closed doors, did not include any of the Arizona animal protection organizations. So here's the bill, and it literally is the top 10. It would completely remove livestock from the cruelty code. It would require all evidence of cruelty to be turned over within 5 days. Would forbid local law enforcement from even investigating cruelty to livestock. And it's unclear whether livestock included horses. Huge exemptions. And here's where the devil is like, oh no, it's separate but equal. We're just putting them in their own separate category. We'll treat them exactly the same, except at the bottom, like, oh, and by the way, we're going to reduce cruelty to livestock from a felony back down to a misdemeanor. So that really gives the lie to what they were trying to do. And 87% of Arizona voters oppose taking livestock out of the cruelty code. And that's the wonderful thing about legislation, is that we have the numbers. Any polling you do shows that the vast majority of Americans really care deeply about these issues and want to see increased animal protection and reduced animal cruelty. And no matter how you subslice this, like rural, urban, Republican, 85% even of Republican voters in Arizona said they did not want to see livestock removed from the cruelty code and wanted them to be protected just as much as other animals. So it's great when you're talking to legislators, like, okay, just so you know, what you're about to do is going to piss off 85% of the voters in your own district as a Republican. And so, but the writing was on the wall, looked like it was going to go through, and even our own lobbyists were asking us to kind of shift to neutral, and the coalition just said, well, we can't possibly not oppose this. And in grace of God or whomever, the sponsor of the bill got in a kind of a tussle with the Senate president and over something completely unrelated to the budget, and he's like, fine, I'm not letting your bill come up for a vote, and it died. Sadly, it was just resurrected this year, and we thought we had bottled it up committee, and they do this thing called like striker bills, where you can take a bill, completely erase it. It's already been introduced about something completely unrelated. Erase it and just cut and paste an entire other bill into it. We call them like zombie bills because they like come back from the dead. Like you think you've killed it and it just comes up as a new bill number. And so that's going on now. So that just passed and it's on the governor's desk, Ducey, in Arizona. So we're asking everybody to kind of call the Arizona tourism office and say you're never going to go there again if he signs this thing. And so the last one I'll talk about is Kentucky. It's a special state. It's always dead last on our ALDF rankings of the state's animal protection laws. And so I'll give you an idea of just how crazy this world is. So last year, 5 days before the end of the session, was kind of frantic race, there was a bill that was introduced to just ban gas chamber euthanasia using it at shelters. And right at the very end of the session, they tagged an ag-gag provision onto it, which then makes the sponsor have to then scramble and try and kill her own bill after all the animal protection organizations had spent all this time and money and energy and effort to get people to support this bill because it was something that helped animals. They kind of put this poison pill into it, which either it passes and they get ag-gag, or we then work to kill our own bill and they win either way. So that same year, the same sponsor introduced another anti-dogfighting bill and said, okay, we'll let your little dogfighting bill pass out of committee, but we're going to add an anti-abortion provision to it. And there's usually a requirement things be germane. Like, I don't know how, my joke, and the other thing is like the dog, people who like sort of breed and sell AKC dogs and stuff like that also usually oppose most animal protection measures. Like, well, this is probably the one bill that the breeders are going to support. So, and it was Joni Jenkins. So yeah, Joni Jenkins has to go then work to kill both of her bills. And then this is the great one this year. So this year it gets even more absurd. There's a bill, so the most bare minimum standards of animal welfare are usually like food, shelter, water, right? I mean, and vet care. Those are sort of like the bare minimum. Kentucky still doesn't have the shelter part of that equation or vet care. It's like food and water right now. So it's just simply to add, okay, shelter. You just have to provide shelter to an animal that's kept outside, dog or cat. And they said, okay, we'll allow your little shelter thing to get through committee. We're going to add two things. Not only did they add an ag-gag provision at the very end of the session, they also added a provision saying that all Kentuckians would be forced to obtain health insurance for their dogs and cats under the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, which, again, is just their way of, like, saying, here's what we think of you, here's what we think of Obama, and here's, we're just going to make sure this thing dies. So, in face of all this, Animal Legal Defense Fund, with a coalition of other organizations and journalists, such as Will Potter, have introduced lawsuits challenging these laws as unconstitutional. And there was some resistance to that from other animal protection organizations because one line of thinking was that, hey, as you saw the stats earlier, we're pretty much like 24-1 at the legislative level. Like, we're kind of succeeding in keeping these down. But our perspective was like, well, yeah, but what about the states that already exist? Iowa, Iowa's one of the largest ag producers in the country. We're just supposed to like write that off and pretend it doesn't exist, and all the animals that already are there. And so, but we do, and now that it's actually the lawsuits have been filed, most folks involved in animal protection legislation agree that the existence of these suits is helping provide a reverse chilling effect, where we're saying, hey, do you really want to bite this off when two other states are being sued over the constitutionality? So there's Amy Meyer, one of our lead plaintiffs, and you see an eco-terrorist, and here's the footage she shot, and that's it. So feel free to hit me up if you have any questions. I'll be here all day, and thank you very much. And next up, and then following on from this, the sequence of how this is going to go, like I'm going to give you an overview. Carter's then going to come in and talk specifically about the litigation stuff, and then TJ is going to discuss the on-the-ground effects of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Our next speaker is Carterillard, right here behind me. He is currently the director of our litigation program at the Animal Legal Defense Fund, where he manages over a half a dozen staff attorneys and dozens of participating pro bono law firms. Carter has helped quadruple within less than 3 years the number of matters the organization has filed, and he's helped achieve judgments, settlements, and precedent that, among other things, replaced negligent management at public shelters, ended systematic abuses at factory farms and hunting facilities, moved wildlife from roadside zoos into sanctuaries, and improved standing for animal advocates. Carter previously served as general counsel for Compassion Over Killing, where he settled a case that resulted in one of the biggest changes in animal product advertising in U.S. history, and as a director of the Farm Animal Litigation Program for the Humane Society of the United States, where he helped to orchestrate one of the only animal cruelty prosecutions of a corporation for factory farming. With that, I would like to turn it over to Carterillard.
Obviously waiting for my star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. That amazing bio. Thanks, Pam. So, maybe a relatively small group of people huddled in the basement on a Saturday morning. UCLA? USC. USC, great school nonetheless. But I'm an loudspeaker, I'll do this. So, but I still can't help but feel every time at an event like this, sort of the gravity of the situation, because it's so obvious, given the trajectory of human moral progress, right? The inclusion of vulnerable classes of individuals that we normally, in our past, excluded and abused and exploited, whether it was other races, other nationalities, other genders, other sexual orientations, right? the arc of our progress as a species has been to include these groups, and yet all the while ignoring other species. Right? Billions and billions of creatures who have their own lives, but whom we've more or less yoked to ours in ways that we once thought was necessary, justified, required. But as we learn about the impacts of things like factory farms on climate change, we're realizing has actually been to our own detriment. And there is no way that in the next 10 to 20 years, our sentiments won't change with regard to them as well. So our many friends in the room and many new faces, but all I think here with an essential part of a mission that's probably the next and maybe the most important step in terms of moral human progress. And I think that progress has to be reflected and has to occur in our courts, in our legal system, certainly our political system, legislative, executive system. But I think it really has to happen in our courts because that's the independent venue, the tribunal where really right and wrong, justice gets decided. So we'll start off, there are three things I want to do in the next 20 minutes or so. I want to talk about that essential moral and legal question that we're faced with and courts are faced with. And we could talk about all of the different lawsuits, and we will, but I think underlying them all, there will be one question waiting to be answered. Second thing we'll talk about is, okay, we need to answer this moral question, this legal question. How do we get there? How do we get to court? And there are three hurdles that we'll have. We will always have, but primarily secrecy. Factory farms are not made of glass. They are the height of secrecy in many ways because factory farmers are well aware that if we knew how animals there were being treated, those animals wouldn't be there, just because of our basic moral sentiments. We'll talk about hurdles to getting into court even if we know what's going on in factory farms. Lots of things preventing us to get to that venue to address the moral question. And then lastly, we'll spitball a possible answer to this moral question. So rather than just give you guys a list of cases, that's sort of how I'd like to think about it. That there is a question that we need to answer, and courts will help us do it if we can get there, past the secrecy, past the hurdles, past things like exemptions in animal cruelty laws, and that there might be some answer we might agree on even here this morning, huddled in the basement, about how we want to relate to the rest of the species on this planet. What we know from the previous presentations is that animals in factory farms are suffering in immense ways. What we don't know is the degree to which they're suffering, but we can speculate, right? So we know, for one, if there's something like aberrant animal cruelty, somebody stabbing an animal with a pitchfork, beating them with rebar, kicking animals, slamming them against walls, things that happen in videos we see all the time, possibly happen in factory farms around the country every day. These things are obviously causing suffering. But what we don't, I think, realize is that if we were to try to see the world through those animals' eyes, the level of suffering that they're enduring because of their natural inclinations, right? It's not just whether this animal can be subject to suffering as a blank slate. These animals have their own desires, right? They have families. These factory farms have separated these animals from. They have imaginations about how they would want to live their lives. They have desires to be independent from other animals, to have privacy. All of these things are, we use the term frustrated, but it's much worse than that. These are denied, these animals, in a way that probably amounts to something like solitary confinement for humans. So the level of suffering in factory farms, it's not just about abuse. We're talking about deprivation of what these animals need in a way that causes them psychological torture. And we know that a lot from things like assessing cortisol levels in animals, and not necessarily through how they act because of how stoic they are. So the level of suffering is intense. And that brings us to the question, underlying question. If you tore apart every animal cruelty law in this country and boiled it down to its essence, I would argue that the question is whether or not animal suffering is ever necessary or justified. Right? we would not allow animals to suffer under our care, either by act or omission, abuse or neglect, unless it was necessary or justified. We'd have to come forward with some reason for why that's required. And that's the question we're faced with. You know, obviously it is necessary and justified. That's why we've got bacon and eggs and all manner of stuff out there, because we'd die if we didn't eat animal protein, right? Or it's necessary and justified because where else would these animals go? I mean, they have to be fed somewhere and housed. I mean, that maybe that's an answer. Or all of these potential arguments for necessity and justification, that's the question. I mean, do we need to do this anymore? Did we ever need to do it? Come forward as a factory farmer and explain yourself. Explain why, what we know to be true. The suffering is there. But you can do it, cause it, if you can justify it. That's the question I think, in the end, we have to answer. Whether we do it in the legislature, we do it in the courts, do it in the executive branch, we have to do it. And courts, as I've said, I think will play a central role in answering that question because they are considered independent tribunals. We're not supposed to be answering this question based on the wills of majority, special constituencies, all of the pernicious, corruptive influences you've heard Chris Green talk about. We're supposed to be doing it in an independent way. And so this idea of answering this question in the courts is nothing new. We've done it before. Schools must be segregated. It's the only way for our educational system to work. That question answered in large part in the courts. Today, homosexuals cannot possibly appreciate and enjoy marriage in the same way that heterosexuals can. This is a question that we're trying to answer in the courts in many ways. Other key questions, the EPA have authority to regulate greenhouse gases. These questions we take out of the political spectrum and try to answer them in the courts. And so the question about whether or not factory farming and the suffering that we can take as a given is ever necessary or justified, that remains to be answered. And I think by getting to the court, or as we say, by hook or by crook, in creative ways, ideally creative and not, well, I won't use the word. Creative is what we'd like to say. That pushing these questions into court, right? That is going to, I think, begin to help courts deal with the central question, hopefully. And what I'll say, we'll get to at the end here and maybe talk about a little bit, but I think maybe with the advent of climate change and more information about how animal-based diets affect our health, that the answer is that factory farming is not only not necessary, justified animal cruelty, that it's something that has negative social utility. That if we didn't factor in animals' well-being at all and just looked at human well-being, that it's something that's not helpful, it's hurtful. So that, I think, is the question, and I think maybe that's one possible answer. So how do we get to court? As I've said, I think there are three hurdles that we're consistently having to deal with. But every time they throw up a hurdle, we find a way to litigate around it. We publicize that case, publicize the litigation, and the public becomes aware. And I think it's that awareness that's driving the progress that Chris Green talked about. Constituencies want to make a change. Public is aware, more and more aware, and I think litigation and publicizing that litigation is one way to do it. So one of the hurdles for getting to court right off the bat is secrecy. Right? Can't just walk into a factory farm and take pictures, unless you're TJ, which he'll tell you about. Not many of us have the gall to do that. I certainly wouldn't. So judges are not really scary. I think what TJ does is really scary, but judges are kind of scary. So we can go to court. How do we get there? Well, we need to know what's going on inside the farms. One way, traditionally, that public interest lawyers have found a way to get to court is through public records. And in fact, despite the dearth of federal standards and some state standards for treatment of animals in these facilities, there's still plenty of public recording going on. And one question right off the bat is, are those public records releasable? Can all of the animal advocates out there that want to learn about how factory farmed animals are treated get those public records? And so a case we're dealing with now in the Ninth Circuit involves access to inspection reports by FDA inspectors at egg farms all around the country. And literally one of the question at the core of that case is whether or not information about the number and density of hens in hen houses, factory farmed hen houses, where there are millions of animals crammed, usually 10 to 12 a cage, so that each of them has about the size of a sheet of paper. Just the numbers, industry has pushed back and said there are trade secret problems with releasing those numbers. And so this is a good thing in many ways in that we're at the first hurdle. We don't even know what it's like in terms of these facilities because we can't quite figure out population density. And so the question will now come up as to whether or not there's really any trade secret justification for denying that information or whether we'll get access to it. So for any lawyers in the room, people that aren't lawyers, usually they're oftentimes the biggest proponents behind the best lawsuits, people that just care about a moral issue and think it ought to get to court, and they're going to dog every lawyer until they can find one that'll bring it. To those folks and the lawyers as well, public records cases are good cases. Should the public know, and what rationale would industry have for denying it? Second hurdle, also regarding secrecy, right? Finding out what's going on in the farms. Let me back up for a minute and say, we're talking about egg inspection reports for density of hens in layer houses. There is another fight brewing in California right now over records for factory farms that will be going to court, and I think it's of increasing interest to every Californian, and that's over water usage. Might be an issue with water in California in the next couple of decades. I don't know. You're using that water to supply an industry with negative social utility, given the environmental and health impacts. Should we at least know how much water they're using? Well, if we knew, they would argue, we might learn how they sort of produce, might get to their production costs. If we outed their production costs, their competitors might find out, they'd be undercut. So this is a fight we're going to have. But again, public records is a great area of the law. Second area of the law we can get into, if we can get into courts, get over the secrecy hurdle, involves ag-gag laws. The best litigators that I've worked with, and I am not one of them, are in this room doing the case. Leslie's here. I know Matthew Strugar's here, a couple folks. So I'm not the preeminent expert on our ag-gag laws. But the Idaho and Utah's laws really were quite obviously beyond the pale and unconstitutional. And after some sort of wrangling in the movement, we got around to challenging those laws. Both states moved to dismiss the cases, and the states lost those motions in both. We filed a motion for summary judgment in the Idaho case, and I think we're doing discovery in the Utah case. But the essential question there, several questions constitutional, but the essential question is, what would be the justification for a state specifically targeting the collection of information in a factory farm and prohibiting its dissemination? Why target factory farms specifically and not other particular industries? Why prohibit the dissemination of that information, assuming if you prohibited the collection, why even prohibit the dissemination? What if some of the statements about the legislature made in choosing to target factory farms suggested that the legislature didn't have some public interest in mind, but perhaps simply wanted to target an unpopular political minority, like animal rights activists? What if some of those laws seemed to be in conflict with federal laws regarding protection of whistleblowers? So the secrecy, the ag-gag law is essentially criminalizing collection of information, dissemination, video, photographs inside factory farms. That question raises a larger question about free speech and the dissemination of information, collection of it in our society, and in some ways discrimination against a small but increasingly effective political minority of animal rights folks. So these cases raise, again, if it's not public records and trying to prohibit public records from being released, trying to prohibit people from coming into factory farms, this idea of secrecy, but getting to court to question the secrecy can in the end work in our favor. As Chris suggested, the ag-gag cases themselves have made ag-gag laws less popular, as well as the inherent illogic of passing a law that gave a greater criminal penalty for collecting information about animal cruelty than actually committing animal cruelty. But ag-gag laws are another way we can try to go get over the hurdle of secrecy and get into court. What's another? Not necessarily through records collected on the farm or through getting into the farm and surveilling what's going on there, but through the way that consumers see factory farms, and that's through labels. Right? Labels are incredibly influential material to consumers' decisions. And consumers aren't going on to factory farms, and if they're not seeing our videos, they're not looking at public records, they're not going to know what's going on there, but how do they get the information? They get it through labels. And that's another area of secrecy, because labels about how animals are treated in factory farms are often, if not most of the time, inherently misleading, because producers do not want the public to know about how animals in those facilities are treated, and they'll try to undercut each other by basically fudging on the way that they treat their animals, saying that they're treated better than they are. So when that happens, another way to get into court is by challenging false and misleading labels. And the question before the courts is very simple. Is what is going on in the factory farm represented on that label, or are purchasers being misled? Another case headed to the Ninth Circuit, ALDF's litigating, little different spin on this, and that is that we, as an organization, had seen so much false advertising when it came to egg production that we've said, look, we can't keep filing these lawsuits. There are dozens and dozens of producers out there. We just can't afford to do it. So the feds look at your statutes again. You need to come up with a rule that prohibits this sort of false advertising. Real simple. 3 words, right? Put caged, cage-free, free range on your eggs. Make those control terms. And that is a way to tell consumers the basic information about how those animals are treated. Feds refused under pressure from producers. Obviously, they don't want that information out there, and that's going to be litigated. But whether it's false and misleading labels or the requirement that we have some rule about telling people, like GMO labeling, how their food is produced, that's another area to getting into court. So these 3 lawsuits, right, public records, ag-gag, false labeling, required labeling, these are just ways to get into court to see what's going on in the factory farms. So we can begin to address the basic moral question. Second hurdle is actually getting into court once we've got the information, right? What is, anyone know, what's a hurdle? Somebody raise their hand. Hurdle to getting into court if you want to protect animals. Yeah. Standing. Wow, okay. You guys have been a lot of good law school students. That's right. And there are a couple avenues, I think, creative avenues around this second. We'll just focus on standing as the hurdle to get into court, right? What if you're there to try to get into court on behalf of the animal? A lot of factory farms are funded by taxpayer dollars. We don't have to get into court on behalf of the animal anymore. As a taxpayer, I don't want my money being spent in illegal ways, wasteful ways. Generally, as a rule of law, you cannot spend taxpayer dollars in illegal ways. And if the illegality is cruelty, suddenly we're off to court, but we're off to court on behalf of taxpayers. Neighbors living next to a factory farm, right? They're suffering smells, odors, sounds, pollution, that sort of thing. Oftentimes, factory farms, neighbors are prohibited from suing to recoup the loss of their enjoyment of their property under what's called nuisance theory, normally by things called right to farm acts and other hurdles. There are exceptions to that. Sometimes right to farm acts don't apply if you're not complying with federal and state law, including cruelty law. Some facilities smaller facilities don't rise to the level that trigger right to farm acts. So another way to get to court is not on behalf of the animals themselves, a standing problem. You could go through taxpayer interests. You could also go through neighbors' interests. Expanded nuisance theory is one way to do it. You can also go, and this is something we've been sort of toying around with recently, you can also get to court more and more often through creative uses of consumer protection statutes, right? One thing our law is pretty good at is trying to require economic actors to work on a level playing field. And that means you cannot violate the law in a way that gives you a competitive advantage in the market. So generally, laws, especially in California, you are allowed to enjoin illegal conduct if you can show it's giving the person who's engaged in that conduct some sort of benefit, competitive advantage. And that can be done through competitors who are losing because of this disadvantage. So for example, ALDF brought a case on behalf of a faux gras producer against foie gras producers who claim to be humane. Only foie gras is humane. We've seen it now being used by animal protection organizations that can show clear violations of consumer protection laws in ways that in fact disadvantage them, primarily because the organizations have been spending resources in trying to prevent the illegal conduct in ways that are considered diversions from their mission. Great decision in the first district recently. So that it's possible to get to court, get the information, overcome the secrecy hurdle. Having that fight itself can be beneficial to animals by telling the public not only are animals treated poorly, but they're doing everything they can to hide it. Getting to court where we have these battles, even if it's through interests that aren't the animals themselves, sometimes through taxpayers, sometimes through neighbors, sometimes through competitors. And then the third hurdle, which is a hurdle we can't surmount in court, and that's the exemption of factory farms from animal cruelty law. But I say it's still key to get to court on these first two issues because by building the public awareness of just how secret these places are and just how hard it is to get to court, all the interests that are relevant, by the time I think we get to the legislatures and readdress whether these exemptions make any sense, I think having fought these battles out in court will help us answer that question. And that'll sort of bring us to the end, and that is if we've managed to get to court and gotten over the secrecy hurdles, and we are boiled down to that essential moral question, right? Whether or not what factory farmers do to the animals in those facilities, the billions of animals suffering in ways that we really can't imagine, whether or not that's necessary or justified. As I said, I think that given the impact on our environment, given the impact on our health, the question, if we can ask it, is that factory farms are not necessary. They are not justified. And while the human health and environmental impacts are enough to say that they should stop, the real moral question is the suffering of animals and whether that is enough to say that these facilities should stop. That it was never required, it was never necessary, it was never justified for us to cause innocent creatures to suffer in these horrible ways, and that if we're continuing to move in the direction that we have with regard to other genders and other races and other nationalities, other sexual orientations, if we're continuing to abandon the outright exploitation of classes of individuals that are more vulnerable than we are, if we're moving in that direction, we will do so for animals. And eventually, I think, begin to see animals not just as things in our world that we can either benefit from or not, but as a class of individuals that really deserve their own autonomy, deserve their own freedom. Maybe moving in the direction where our relationship with animals is primarily one of seeing them as wildlife, right? In their world, giving them a non-human autonomy in their world. The exact opposite of factory farms, glaring opposite. But I think the obvious, in many ways, endpoint of a progress, moral progress of our own species in how we treat others. So thank you all for being here and helping us do it.
Thank you, Carter. And last but not least, we have TJ Tumasse, who is the manager of our investigations unit at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. TJ recruits, trains, and supports the Animal Legal Defense Fund's undercover investigators who document evidence, prepare cases, conduct research on animal cruelty. He oversees all aspects of undercover investigations and creates a support network for investigators in the field. Before coming to ALDF, TJ worked as an undercover investigator for Mercy for Animals and at PETA in 30 states and in many industries in which animals are exploited and abused. In 2011, TJ helped expose animal cruelty at Sparbo, one of the largest egg farms in the U.S., while working for Mercy for Animals. As a result, McDonald's, Target, and other retailers dropped this supplier. One of the most well-known successes brought about by the first felony conviction for cruelty to factory farming birds in the U.S., after an investigation he conducted while working for PETA, exposed abusive operations at avian turkeys in 2008. With that, I introduce you to TJ. Come on up.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to USC and for the sponsors and everyone who put on the event. I am happy to be here as well. Thank you to the other panelists. So what Carter and Chris talked about is a lot of theory and a lot of application when it comes to the law and the protection of animals. And my focus is, of course, very different than that. In undercover investigations, we cover a lot of practice. And this is on the ground, on the front lines, in the midst of this suffering, in the midst of the application of these laws. So I'm going to show a couple of ways that we go about doing this. I'm going to talk about some of the experiences that I've had and the things that I've seen while doing the documentation of cruelty and suffering to these animals. So first, I'm going to show a couple of videos that kind of demonstrate what Carter and Pam talked about with moral progress when it comes to the way that animal suffering is justified. All right? There's this idea of secrecy that Carter talked about, and to best demonstrate that, I'm going to use something that you're all probably very familiar with. The illusion the factory farms put on. Hopefully this will come through.
Morning. So what do you think then? Get an early start on that alfalfa on the back 40?
What's the hurry? Hit the snooze.
Great cheese comes from happy cows. Happy cows.
From California, right? Everybody's familiar with these advertisements. These show cows in this sort of idyllic setting, this barnyard, the hay on the ground, the cute little tractor, the rooster crowing to wake them up. The reality, however, is that factory farming, especially when it comes to dairy products, is nothing like this at all. The intensive confinement that these animals experience is horrendous. Dairy cows typically only live between 3 and 6 years. Cows living a more natural lifestyle can live upwards of 25 years. This is the reality of a dairy farm.
In this eyewitness footage, cows whose sensitive noses can smell odors up to 6 miles away are made to trudge through deep manure. The cows cannot escape swarms of flies. The cows must stand in their own waste while eating or trying to rest. The dairy factory's manure was not cleared out for so long that it hardened. Manure coats the animal's legs and splashes onto their udders moments before they are milked. Here you see the untreated, overgrown right hoof of a cow identified only as 2 by a tag on her ear. A thick layer of manure is caked on her legs. Here she hobbles out of the milking parlor. Putting weight on her overgrown hoof caused her severe pain. This is also cow 2 as she stands in the milking parlor. Her bones protrude sharply as she is emaciated. Producing milk requires cows to expend a tremendous amount of energy. Cows denied proper nutrition and care can quickly become emaciated. This is cow 188, who is little more than a skeleton. Here, cow 6 bleeds from the nose, attracting more flies. At night, cows have no grass, straw, or bedding to lie down on to get out of the manure, and they can't rest because flies keep biting them. If you do not wish to support the dairy industry's cruelty to cows, please go vegan for their...
Okay. These images are mild compared to what we normally see. And I will spare you any further images, but I will describe some of the things that I've seen. Carter mentioned industry standards and what Chris did as well, and what they are allowed to do. And what this looks like in reality is quite disturbing. Dehorning of cattle is an industry standard. They have a rope tied around their neck, sometimes through a hook, a bull hook it's called, in their nose. Their heads are pulled down to a bar or into a trap of some type that they can't move. And they have what is essentially a giant pair of pliers or bolt cutters put on their head, and their horns are literally sheared off. No anesthetic whatsoever. Sometimes also with a hot iron put on the open bleeding wound afterward to cauterize it. Tail docking, also very prevalent in the dairy industry as well as in pork production. This is because these animals are intelligent in ways that we don't understand always, and they are very inquisitive and very social. Pigs, very often in factory farms that are raised for meat production, will attack each other and chew each other's body parts, the ears and the tails, so that they have something to do with their time. These things are done in such an excruciating way to them that it's hard to even talk about sometimes. Teeth cutting on pig farms is another one, as well as debeaking and castration. Baby chicks, when they're just days old, will be stuck into a machine that has a hot metal blade that comes down and shears off the end of their beak. It's like having your nose cut off. It's the only thing I can describe it in a similar way to. Castration, once again, is done without anesthesia to very conscious, sentient, feeling beings. I worked at a pig farm called Christensen in Minnesota, and when I was there, the job that I was working was in farrowing, which is where the baby piglets are born in these crates that are 2 levels of confinement. One for the mother, where the mother gives birth with bars on the sides so that she literally cannot move. She can barely stand up most of the time. Outside of that is a walled area where the piglets can stand. When they're born, these piglets are, the best way I can describe what they experience is jubilation. They are so happy to be alive, despite these conditions that they live in. Now remember, in a pig farm, it's no windows, no doors, very little filtration, and they're standing on a metal grate over a manure pit. The smell of ammonia and waste is so strong that it would give me a bloody nose sometimes when I was working there. And despite that, these young, innocent children were incredibly happy to be there and to be alive, to experience the world for the first time, just as a human child would be experiencing the world for the first time and be excited about it. And you, as a farm worker, have to walk into those rooms, cut their teeth and their tails off, and cut their testicles out if they're male, with no anesthesia. And when you do that, you destroy their whole world. Their innocence and their happiness disappears. And they are in the midst of terror that they never even imagined they could experience. And then there's throat slitting. Every animal that goes into meat production or dairy or egg production, nearly every animal, will, at the end of his or her existence, have their throat cut open somehow. There's no exception to this, really. Some of them die of natural causes due to sickness, disease, lack of veterinary care, things like that. But overwhelmingly, these animals are cut open with a very sharp knife, which, once again, I've seen for myself. And I've held those knives in my hand, just like the clippers used at pig farms and the debeaking machines on egg farms. These are all things that I have experienced firsthand. And I'd seen plenty of undercover footage. I'd seen earthlings. I'd seen videos from other investigations when I first started my work as an investigator, and I thought that I was prepared. I thought that I knew what I was in for. And I was very, very wrong. The first time that you walk into that room, that kill floor, that factory, farm, barn, whatever it is, the reality of your five senses experiencing that kind of torment and torture and suffering, it takes your breath away. And it leaves you speechless. And a part of you never leaves that room. And it's terrible. What we do to torture these animals is horrible. And it's done in ways that we can't even understand to them. I mean, we understand what it would be like for us. We can empathize and put ourselves in that position. But I call it terror and torture for a reason. I've done those jobs. I've held those knives and those clippers. And as Carter talked about the justification for this cruelty, I can tell you personally, firsthand, that there is none. There is no justification in any way for any of this. I have literally tortured other living beings. And I can stand before you honestly and tell you that torturing others or harming others or having a prejudice against others, it doesn't matter if the other is a different race or gender or species. Torturing and harming others is wrong. And I still have nightmares about it because I have seen it and I have done it. And no amount of excuses, no amount of you can pass all the egg bills you want, and many states are trying to do that still, as Chris pointed out. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many people don't agree with it. This kind of torture is completely unjustified. Chris mentioned 9.5 to 9.1 billion animals are killed. I want to tell you a little bit what that looks like. When I worked at Tyson production facility, live hanging broiler chickens that were going to be killed for meat, most of them sent to McDonald's, I had to live hang these birds. And you have to imagine yourself in a dark room where just black lights or red lights light the room, and there's this incredible grinding, screeching sound of machinery, and there's an assembly line passing by above you in one direction and a conveyor belt coming in below you from another direction. That conveyor belt brings chickens that are dumped out of the back of trucks by forklifts onto this big machine that brings them in on this conveyor belt. When they come into the room, their natural instinct is to run and fly and try to get away. But because it's dark, they don't do this. And each of the men standing on the line stands at that conveyor belt, usually two sides, 11 or 12 men per side of the belt. Each man is responsible for hitting the next consecutive shackle that goes by with a chicken. They call it hitting the shackles. So the first man hangs the first bird. If there's 10 men on the line, he skips 9 shackles and he hangs every 10th one. The line is moving at a rate of 35 birds per minute going by. This means that every single man on that line in the dark has to reach down to the conveyor belt, pick up a chicken, hold the chicken by the legs between your first and second finger, invert the chicken, and slam his or her legs into these shackles. And the workers have to do this at a rate of 1 bird every 1.71 seconds for 8 hours. Many of the workers on these factory farms are illegal immigrants. Many of them work 2 shifts. There are men who literally stand at facilities and hang chickens for 16 hours a day. The egg laws that Chris mentioned and that Carter talked about hope to silence people on the rights of these workers as well. Electrocution is what follows for a lot of these animals. When chickens are hung on a live hang line, they go into what's called a stun bath. It's nothing more than a cold pool of water that has an electric current passing through it. And they're electrocuted to, they say, render them unconscious so that they can be passed through what is similar to a table saw blade. It's a circular blade in a machine that holds the chicken's neck and cuts their throat after they're electrocuted. Any chickens that are not electrocuted and don't pass through the killing blade are killed by a man standing at the back of the machine holding a knife. He's called the backup killer. His job is to stand there and kill chickens who aren't killed by the machine. I've done that job as well. These industries are literally torturing animals to death every day at a rate of 10,000 animals every second. That's what this looks like. We do this so much that it's almost incomprehensible to people. 10,000 animals, one Mississippi, just like that. The companies that are doing this captive bull guns. The companies that are doing this to these animals force the workers to do this day in and day out at this rate of speed, right? The workers have no control over the fact that the line moves at 35 birds a minute, for example, or that they have to unload an entire semi-truck full of chickens in 30 to 40 minutes. Otherwise, the birds will smother themselves to death, piling on top of each other. Pam mentioned the size of chickens. There's another aspect of the depravity of animal agriculture. The size of chickens increased so much over a period of time. At Avigen Turkeys in West Virginia, I was on a crew responsible for doing a lot of vaccinations and caretaking of the birds, as well as weighing the turkeys there. This is a turkey supplier. Avigen calls themselves the world's leading supplier of breeding turkeys. They create bloodlines of turkeys that they sell to other manufacturers like Purdue or Pilgrim's Pride or whoever, is selling turkey products. Turkeys in the wild weigh 22, 23 pounds, 24, 25 at the most, maybe. The heaviest male turkey that we weighed at Avigen when I worked there was 117 pounds. And the company, in that particular case, got off scot-free. They were able to blame a scapegoat and say, these people were bad apples. They were doing something wrong, not the company themselves that mandated the work be done at such a speed, in such a way. Really quickly, I want to touch on captive bolt guns and dairy cows. I showed you the dairy cow video there. When dairy cows are spent, in other words, when they are no longer useful to the dairy company because they don't produce enough milk, like I said, usually 3 to 5 years, maybe 6 at the most, they're sent to slaughter. Now, before this happens, they are bred intentionally to have their babies taken away. Okay, and Carter talked about the experience of families being separated. And I can tell you firsthand that that's exactly what they go through. They have their children stolen from them right in front of their faces, and they can do nothing about it. And they are put, these babies are put in what looks like a large doghouse, and they lay in these little pens in these little doghouses, and they cry and they cry and they cry for their mothers, because that's what they want, is comfort and support from their families, and they're denied that completely. Then when the mother is spent, she's sent to slaughter, and she has what's called a captive bolt gun put up to her forehead, and what it is a pneumatic metal rod shot out of this gun under power. It shoots it out and sucks it right back in again. And it hits them right in the forehead, and it's supposed to render them unconscious. And more often than I can even tell you, they are not unconscious, and the cows that are both walking into the facility and after they're hit with the captive bolt gun cry. It's disturbing to see this. Their tears are just as real as yours and mine. They fear for their own existence. And it's gut-wrenching. Pigs are the same way. When they're sent to slaughter, they try to huddle together, hide behind each other. They try to run away backwards down the chutes. Chickens, once again, are the same way still. They do not want their lives to end. They have every interest in living the same way that we do. And now, AGEG is trying to make that illegal. They're trying to say that what they are doing at these industries is okay. They're trying to say that it's humane. They're trying to say that it's necessary. Just like Carter talked about, just like Chris talked about, these laws, these I can't even call them laws with a straight face because of how absurd it is. Having seen what I've seen, I can tell you it's absurd because it really is the most ridiculous attempt at silencing people who only want the best for other beings who are suffering. And that's part of the problem with these AGEG bills. The reporting laws, for example, in Missouri, let's see if I can get through these. Iowa, this is just a list of AGEG states. Missouri's reporting law says that you have to report abuse within 12. Some states have 24 hours, just depending on their laws. What's not really that well known is that in most of these states, when you take video footage of animals suffering there, they say, oh no, wait, you have to establish a pattern of abuse. That was an isolated incident. That was a bad employee. It's completely contradictory. They say you have to report abuse within 12 hours, but you also have to establish a pattern of abuse, which they will not accept in a 12-hour time period. It's absurd. These institutions, these companies exploit humans and animals for their own gain and for profit. And that's what we are trying to stop here at ALDF, and that's why we all work so hard. Thank you.
Thank you, TJ. I have to say that's the first time I've ever heard him speak, and I just want to thank him for his courage and bravery and going to the darkest places on behalf of animals. So thank you, TJ. We have about 15 minutes left for Q&A, so I'd like to open that up. Any questions you have for our panelists?
I have a question for TJ. I heard you speak before. What I think people haven't heard from you is how little all of the work you've done has actually resulted in change. Because I know most of the time, like you say, it's a bad apple or whatever. Can you tell them a little bit more about what's actually happened after the fact?
Yeah, so do you guys hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Okay. The question, in case anyone did not hear it, was what has actually changed since some of these cases have happened. Avian turkeys in West Virginia, which I mentioned, the 117-pound turkeys at, yielded the first ever felony conviction for factory farmed birds in the United States of America. That was one result. As Pam mentioned, Sparbo was found of egregious cruelty to animals, and many of the retailers that bought eggs from them dropped them as a supplier. Most often, that's the result of a lot of these cases. It's more common for cases to yield companies changing suppliers, which isn't the best result, but it could be worse. I mean, at least something is happening, right? We're getting results that the companies are coming forward and saying, as Nestle did, that what's happening to these animals behind these closed doors is not okay. And even if it's not a complete change overnight, it's a shift in thinking. And that's more the result than anything else that we're going for is a paradigm shift, a shift in the way that people have a concept of animals as being things or possessions, not beings. And that's more than anything a lot of what we're trying to change, as well as policy. The legal side of this is somewhat newer to me, but the goal to come out of many of these investigations is, of course, to change laws and to change policies. One of my investigations at a Cargill plant in Texas yielded, it was never released publicly at all. No one really ever even heard about the case, but it sparked an enormous internal investigation within the USDA itself because their inspection agents were not adequately checking for contamination entering the food supply. So many of these cases have results that are not publicly seen or that don't result in criminal convictions necessarily, but are still very, very effective in creating progressive change.
If I could just add to that too, I think one thing that is really important is the larger systemic changes that result from this. Just in the past couple weeks, there have been several major food suppliers that have agreed to go cage-free or ban gestation crates because even in the legislature, you're still these organizations still have a massive influence. And whereas early stages, the animal protection folks were battling producers directly, and with some of these producers, even if it costs 1/100th of 1 penny more per animal, that still adds up to them, and they're not going to do it. So then you go to legislatures, and that's what's been amazing about Prop 2 and some of the other public ballot initiatives is where you can kind of circumvent the legislature, but those are immensely expensive. And so a great strategy has been to then target the intermediaries, the retailers and the distributors, because they're not producers, they're essentially just marketing and delivery vehicles. And so they have no real interest in perpetuating the suffering, and they have a huge negative interest in not being labeled as entities that support that. So that's been like Safeway's, one of the largest, you think of Safeway the store, but they're actually a massive distributor, the largest distributor in the country for groceries. And so when they say, okay, we're not purchasing pork that's been raised with gestation crates, that's amazing, because then all of a sudden these producers can be screaming bloody murder all they want, and Farm Bureau throwing all the money it wants around legislatures, but it doesn't matter if there's no more market for those products. So I think, and these videos are a perfect way of doing it, because they put them up and say, hey, this is what Walmart is supporting, this torture that you're seeing, and they act really quickly once their name gets associated with those images. So.
I wonder, Carter, you were talking about access to information and some of the reasons they try to deprive you of information, and I was just wondering
if there's ever been an approach to look at it from a wage and hour perspective and to bring a lawsuit on behalf of a class of employees for donning and doffing or meal and rest period violations or other wage and hour unpaid overtime, for example, has that been used as a tactic to try and get some information about the conditions for workers and the numbers?
No, it's a great question. Actually, I should probably defer to Leslie, who may know more about that. Public Justice specializes in representing those interests as well. I will say one thing. I have brought cases involving John Doe plaintiffs who are workers in those facilities. And they obviously have aesthetic injury standing because they're next to the animals in the facilities in a way that nobody else would. That's as close as I've come, other than including workers' interests and things like our ag-gag suits. But I have not used laws that would involve wage theft and that kind of thing. But I don't know if Leslie can speak to that more.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Leslie Bruckner. I work with Public Justice. As TJ said, a big problem is that a huge number of the workers in factory farms and in the slaughterhouse and poultry processing industries are undocumented aliens. And even those workers who are not undocumented aliens are subjected to an incredible climate of fear and oppression. And whereas there used to be something like 80% unionization in slaughterhouses, now it's down to something like 20%. So it's very, very difficult to get the workers to agree to be plaintiffs in a lawsuit because they're afraid. There are massive violations of basically every kind of workplace protection law imaginable on the books that are happening every single day in every aspect of the industrial animal sector. But the lawsuits are really very, very few and far between. We would love to bring more lawsuits on behalf of workers in every aspect of this industry. And if you know of any way into that sector, call me. I have got my cards. We would love to do more of that litigation. It's just incredibly difficult. And one of the most difficult things to figure out as a litigator is what are the hooks to get into this industry. There are so few of them. And you'll hear a little bit later that one of the things that we do is we bring environmental lawsuits because it's one of the few hooks. But it's a great question. So.
Just to add to that, in things that I've seen, when I was working at Sparbo, that crew, other than 3 individuals, was all illegal immigrants. And even the 3 legal ones who worked on the crew at those men, we were very often asked and required by the company to work 12, 15, 16, even more than 20. One day we actually worked for 31 hours without stopping. Over an entire day and night, and didn't quit until the next day, 30 hours later. And it's really unbelievable, the kinds of exploitation that happen, both in terms of the human beings and the animals.
Hi, thank you so much to you all for sharing your expertise. I was wondering, on a global scale, how do you see other countries' policies comparing to those in the U.S., especially as we see consumption of animal foods increasing in other countries?
Sure. I mean, I can start us off. I think the European Union is probably well ahead of the United States in trying to at least set standards for on-the-farm animal treatment. So we have no federal standards for on-the-farm treatment, really. And so I think if that, they would be leading in terms of standards. And on the other side, in terms of the developing world, I'm afraid they're probably moving more towards the wrong way, the direction of the United States, which is adopting industrial methods, whereas probably before families were more connected to the animals that they're working with. Now they're probably adopting industrial methods. So I would, from what my familiarity with it, the EU standards are second to individual countries. Switzerland, Denmark have a few higher standards than the EU general. And then, following well behind that are the industrialized and becoming industrialized systems like the United States. So there are examples internationally we could aspire to in terms of improved welfare. Again, the question is, do we need to have animal production for food at all? And so even with a heightened standard like Switzerland, is that really the best we can do? Maybe not.
And if I could just add too, one thing to worry about is a lot of the trade agreements. So there's this TTIP one going through now.
I believe that America here, we are the biggest barbarians from all civilized part of the world. In Europe, I believe that they are getting away, moving away like from gestation cages for the sows. I think that Denmark is still behind and still has it. But we are the biggest barbarians. But I do have a question, general question. How would you compare California with other states? I know that I believe in Idaho we have like more than 8,000 factory farms for the pigs. And how do you compare one thing, California with other states, and what would be the bigger abusers? Can you name them? Bigger abusers, violators, barbarians in California? Thank you.
Well, I'll let Chris, our legislative expert, but I mean, California is in many ways leading the ways in things like prohibiting the production of foie gras. I mean, this is a marker, I think, of progress. Prop 2, right, limiting the level of intensive confinement. Our underlying cruelty law prohibits denying animals adequate exercise. If that ever gets, prosecutors start to sort of apply that, that has huge impact on factory farms. So I think in terms of the standards, very high. Where would the suffering be? I could probably defer to TJ on that. I know the dairy industries, our current egg production until we move into the Prop 2 phase, are real sources of animal cruelty. But in terms of the standards, I think California is trying to set markers that are ahead of the rest of the country. And Chris will know more.
Well, I just think one fundamental issue is that you've got the U.S. Department of Agriculture is entrusted with enforcing these regulations, but at the same time, they consider their mandate to be one of promoting agriculture. So they also, for example, oversee puppy mills. They have to inspect them. And a lot of states or municipalities and counties are passing laws saying that you can only sell puppies that are sourced or dogs that are sourced from shelters, for example, or that you can't sell puppies if you've been from that are sourced from places that have had Animal Welfare Act violations. And so literally the head of enforcement for the USDA said a few months ago that because of these laws, because it's making it harder for these puppy mill operators to get their animals to market because of these violations and these laws, that the USDA was going to then stop writing violations or tickets for these minor violations because they viewed that their role was to help these producers get their animals to market. So there you just have that inherent contradiction of an entity that's mandated is to promote and help get these animal market. At the same time, they're entrusted with regulating and enforcing these animal welfare laws. So and that's why I think it's so important that I can't really see that drastically changing. So I think that's why it is so important to go into the public sphere and to be able to unearth and reveal what's going on and tap into that consumer sentiment that exists. I mean, I said all the polling, everything shows, and you've seen that's why these retailers and others are willing to switch. One quick thing about the international, it's stunning. So Smithfield is the largest pork producer in the world, based in the U.S. They were recently purchased by a Chinese company. And one of the reasons was that in China, it's illegal to use ractopamine, which is an additive that helps pigs gain weight quicker, but it also has some negative effects on them as well. So it's banned in Russia, banned in China, banned in the EU, banned in all these countries. We still use it over here, and China wasn't able to get enough pork from U.S. suppliers, so they actually bought the biggest U.S. supplier in order to make it, partially to make it ractopamine free, so they could then sell back into the Chinese market, which has higher standards than the U.S. I mean, it's just absurd.
So I think we
have time for one more question.
And you were first.
So maybe this is a question more for the third panel today, but Carter, you mentioned standing and information gathering issues. I'm wondering if you've had any luck with state environmental planning statutes, mini NEPA statutes on either of those fronts, if you're able to get into court more easily through that administrative process, and if you're able to use that various permitting processes that may be involved to get information about facilities.
Yeah, Jessica Bloom is she's a former Assistant Attorney General from Missouri, is expert at this sort of thing. Yeah, the environment, and Leslie mentioned as well, for the Animal Legal Defense Fund, environmental laws are an avenue into court to deal with factory farms. Probably not ideal because it may not get to that central question, how the animals are treated, but at least it's an avenue in, and the answer is yeah. Poultry facility in Sonoma County recently had to apply for zoning and an expansion of the facility that would have required public discussion about their use of water. And that's a fight we've been sort of gearing up to become hopefully more involved in the next couple ones that are coming down. So local zoning, certainly. Jessica's been involved in a couple fights in the Midwest on that. NEPA, yes. The Humane Society of the United States spearheaded a case regarding ractopamine as a feed additive human health risk, massive human health risk from the feed additive, never assessed in environmental assessments about how that was ending up in animal effluent and getting into our natural environment. With the Humane Society, have done Clean Water Act cases as well. And these nuisance is sort of borrowed from environmental law. And to the extent the exception to right to farm acts or things like cruelty or other violations, they can drag in the animal interest. So you're absolutely right. As Leslie said, environmental violations by factory farms, probably that's the area of law they're violating the most. And if you can find interested advocates and lawyers to bring the cases, that's an avenue to put pressure on them and increase their production costs. It's just not our ideal type of lawsuit, because it doesn't get to the central question of whether this suffering that we've been ourselves somewhat suffering through this morning is in any way morally justified.
Unfortunately, that was our last question. I wanted to thank the panelists this morning for wonderful presentations, and I also wanted to thank you all for coming out on a Saturday to spend time with us and learn more about this important issue. We're all going to be here for the rest of the day, so feel free to grab us if you have any questions. We are on a break now until 11:10, is that correct? 11:15, so we'll meet you back in here then. Thank you, everyone.